All right, guys. My name is Phil Tereyla with Trouts Fly Fishing. I'm here to talk about everyone's favorite topic, Trophy Fall Trout, in particular targeting Trophy Brown Trout. Want to thank Trouts and Tucker Ladd and Kyle Wilkinson for having me up, along with everybody else here working hard at Trouts. So let's go ahead and we'll dive right in. Again, we're going to talk about targeting Trophy Fall Brown Trout. All right. So as you can see, everybody loves big browns. All right, there's something about the color that they get in the fall, the big kype they get on the lower jaw, getting grumpy looking and mean. There's just something special about brown trout that everybody seems to love. So moving forward, we're gonna have a few topics for discussion here. We're gonna talk about why the fall. Why the fall is such a great time to target trophy brown trout in particular. We'll discuss migratory fish and what that means versus resident trout. We'll definitely talk about spawning beds, what that means for brown trout, why that is a key to our fall fly fishing. We'll also talk about locating large brown trout in the fall. Where they're going to like to be, places that are really going to help you kind of cut down your search for these big fish and really get after it. We'll also talk about food sources, what these fish are feeding on. It'll vary from place to place for sure, but as a general rule of thumb, we'll touch all the big food sources that these fish feed on. We'll go over catching these big fish on the 3 different disciplines: dries, nymphs, and streamers. Yes, they can be taken on dries. I know a lot of people think that it's more of a streamer and nymph game, but they can certainly be taken on dries as well. And at the end, we'll do a quick Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. So why fall? Okay. You might ask, what constitutes fall? Is it when the calendar says it's fall? Is it when the leaves start to change? For me, I think fall starts as early as August. It can last through November and even into December. We'll see fish migrating on the South Platte of the Dream Stream as early as August. A lot of people don't think that those fish show up until October, but they just show up on their spawning beds in October. We very consistently find those fish through August and September as well before they get on their spawning beds. On other rivers like the Miracle Mile North Platte section or other sections of the North Platte, those fish won't start migrating until the end of October into November. And then you have fish on the Taylor and Frying Pan rivers here in Colorado where those fish won't start spawning until December and continue to go through the winter. So that's kind of our time frame that we're going to be most focused on, especially as August through November. We're also going to talk about pre and post spawn fish. So we have these pre-spawn fish, again, starting kind of in August and in September. These fish are going to be much more aggressive, much more on the feed. They're going to be looking for food sources to fuel that spawn. The best way to think about it, if a female is on her bed and she's making a spawning bed, she's going to need a lot of energy to fan that tail, kind of like doing jumping jacks over and over and over until the bed's made. As far as the male brown trout go during the fall, they're going to be sparring and fighting around and doing all sorts of stuff to kind of show their dominance. Kind of like a street fight, they really want to make sure that they have the energy to sustain everything that's going to go with kind of fighting for position and to keep their gene pool going. So the fall, really what we expect and why we start to see those bigger fish. You have shorter days. The water temperatures are going to start to cool. So most of our tailwaters and other rivers around the state, they're going to be more mid-60s, high 50s through the summer months. Come fall, as those days kind of get shorter, leaves start to change color, that water temperature is going to consistently drop as the days begin to get shorter and shorter. That sun's just not going to get into the water quite as much. And then finally, spawning. Fall is when the brown trout will begin to spawn. Again, could be October, November, December. Really whenever water temperatures kind of get into those mid to lower 50s, even the high 40s, those fish will spawn. And then again on the pan and frying pan, or the frying pan and the tailer, even colder. But again, those fish are going to be spawning. They're going to lose their inhibitions, and they're going to start really gorging themselves trying to make sure that they can feed. Following the spawn, then we have our post-spawn fish. Okay, all the energy that it took to create the beds, lay the eggs, fight off other males, that's going to lead to our post-spawn fish and trying to really regain all those calories and all those nutrients that they exhibited and took away during that ritual. So here's a couple of good examples. So here we have Tanner Smith on the right. This is a late November fall brown on the Miracle Mile. Again, this fish had not even started to spawn yet. She's still full of eggs, getting ready to drop, caught out of a deep run below some spawning beds. And on the right here, or the left, we've got a big fish from the Dream Stream. This fish was actually caught just blind nymphing the second week of September. So this is a pre-spawn fish getting ready to come up, lay her eggs. I never saw that fish again. Never saw that fish through any other pictures or posts or anything. Just happened to be this guy's lucky day that we were working a deep run. Fish ate a big crane fly larva, and lucky for that guy, he ended up with a great photo. So again, we've got 2 different times a year focusing on those large fall browns. So there are 2 main different types of trout that we can kind of set into different groups. We've got migratory fish and resident fish. Real quick, the resident fish are going to be fish like in the Deckers area. Those fish are not moving out of a smaller body of water into a larger body of water into a smaller body of water. That'll go a long way as well. There certainly can be some very large fish that show up as resident population fish that may hide most of the year. But again, they start to lose their inhibitions. They'll come out from under rocks behind weed beds, and they'll show themselves. Here we'll talk about migratory trout a little bit. These are fish that will move from one body of water to another in order to spawn. So the best known example kind of on the front range here would be the Dream Stream section of the South Platte. We've got fish that migrate from 11-mile reservoir both in the spring and fall into the river to spawn. These fish will grow to great big sizes in the lake feeding on different forage foods, but that urge to spawn brings them into this small water situation. While that's an example of lake into rivers, you can also get fish that migrate from small rivers into smaller creeks. A good example of that would be the Colorado River and the Williams Fork. Browns and rainbows will both migrate out of the Colorado into the smaller Williams Fork in order to spawn. So what triggers these fish to migrate? Significant changes in water level. If the water is low, or we get a bump or an increase in flow, those fish will get triggered to move in from the lake or from that large body of water. They're going to feel safe. You want to think about it as, if you're a 28-inch fish living in a 110-foot reservoir, why would you come into a river flowing 65 CFS, 1.5 feet deep at its deepest? I wouldn't. But, you get that bump in flow, maybe that river doubles in size. Now those fish don't feel quite as exposed as they move out of that reservoir. Significant changes in weather as well. Kind of spring and fall as those temperatures begin to drop. Any type of big cold snap will trigger these fall browns to move into the river. The water is going to be much colder. Really any type of big cloud cover, those fish aren't going to feel as exposed. They're true, other than pike and other fish and anglers. Their real predator is birds of prey. Okay, so predators from above. Cloudy days, rainy, windy days, those fish aren't going to feel as exposed leaving the deep water and coming into the river. And then the last reason as well is they're going to follow other species. Whether it's here where these fish will follow kokanee salmon up into the river, or maybe the Great Lakes tributaries where they have coho salmon and king salmon migrating up. These fish will move and follow these salmon. You'll find pods of salmon, and there will be large browns sitting right below trying to collect eggs. along with that, as these salmon die, much like you kind of get the flesh hatch in Alaska, these fish are going to feed on those rotting, dying salmon. So that's kind of a big thing as far as getting those fish to move as well. So we're going to kind of talk about some spawning beds here as well. This is a big factor, especially when we're talking about migratory fish or spawning fish in general, targeting fish during the spring and fall. This is a bed from Deckers, the South Platte River around Deckers, and then we've got a handful of spawning beds on the North Platte River in Wyoming. You can very clearly see these spawning beds. Okay, they're going to be clear oval-shaped clearings in the gravel. All right, these fish are going to move a bunch of sediment and everything to the side so that they can deposit their eggs. We're going to go ahead and just say, no matter what, pass over these things. Okay, it's an awesome thing to watch. If you do see these spawning beds, you see fish on these beds, watch them for 5 minutes. Okay, take what is happening into account. Okay, that is the future of our fisheries right there. And after you kind of get an appreciation for it and you kind of see what is happening, move on and go find some fish that aren't actively spawning or on spawning beds. Not only do we not want to fish to these fish on spawning beds, but when you're waiting, you want to be extra careful. Okay, each one of these has so many eggs. All right, the future of our fisheries. So if we step on those, we're going to crush those eggs, and there goes a bunch of fish. So real important to really heed with caution and be very cautious around these spawning beds. That's one of the biggest things I can't stress enough, especially come spring and fall. You know, it's very easy. I mean, you can see, especially on these beds from Wyoming, if there's a 30 or 25-inch brown trout, bright orange, sitting on one of those things, it's going to be super easy to see. Again, look at them, appreciate it for what it is, and then move on. Locating fall trout. So this is I'm going to try to do my best to help you guys locate these fish, take some of the guesswork out. There certainly are exceptions to everything, but this is what works best for me in the fall. So when the water temperatures begin to fall, those fish are going to begin to retreat to the deeper riffles and runs. Okay, especially these large trophy-sized fish. Again, their predators come from above. They're going to want to keep themselves from being exposed, and they're not going to want to be very easy to see. So they're going to retreat to deep riffles and runs. Deep water runs where you may be able to see the bottom, but it's a little bit tough, or those runs where you can't see the bottom at all. Those are great places to start. As those riffles run into these deep runs, those shelves where it goes from maybe 2 or 3 feet deep to 4 or 5 or 6 feet, those shelves are going to be where those fish are actively feeding. They can be right on the edge, get plenty of oxygen, plenty of food washing out of the riffles, but they can also retreat and feel protected in the deep water as well. Another good spot, you're going to use the spawning beds as a key, okay? While there may be fish on the beds or if they're not, okay? Deep water below those spawning beds is a great spot to look for these big fish. Again, they're going to feel protected, and they're going to be down there below the spawning beds actively feeding. Okay, they're going to be trying to get all those calories for when they actually move up onto those spawning beds. So use the spawning beds as kind of a key. Follow those, and you should find some fish below them. Not just browns as well. You'll find rainbows and cutthroats and various species sitting below those beds, eating eggs and stuff that wash off of them. And then especially in the fall, brown trout love structure. Rock gardens, logs, undercut banks, really anywhere where they can hide. Okay, rainbows a lot of times will sit in the middle of the run, but these fall brown trout, they really do like to hide. I can't tell you how many times I've been up at the Dream Stream, mid-September, late August, and not that we catch this fish, but you'll see a tail, 6-8 feet tall, just coming out from under a rock. There's no way to get a drift to that fish, but guess what? You know he's there. Those are areas that we're gonna really kind of focus on structure-wise. Rock gardens, again, rocks, logs. On some other stretches, the upper South Platte, those undercut banks, stripping a streamer or throwing a dry against the bank can lead to some pretty explosive strikes from fish ready to ambush and come out from underneath that undercut. So here's another picture of Tanner working a deep run. This is above Spinney Mountain Reservoir. Again, here we've got a deep water run above some riffles, below some riffles. Those fish can hide and get as close to those pylons as they want to. Tanner's staying low. We've got some lower water, making sure not to spook those fish and send them into hiding. So food sources for trophy trout. You've got your migratory versus resident fish. Okay, so starting with migratory fish, one thing you always want to consider with these migratory fish is they live most of their lives in a larger body of water, be it a lake or a larger river. They're going to feed on different things that a tailwater trout would feed on. Okay, they're not as keyed into those little trichos or blue-winged olives. They will eventually, but starting off, early on, those fish are going to be used to eating, big calabatus, big damsels, leeches, cranefly larvae, lots of scuds, worms, crayfish, small trout, and other bait fish. Those are going to be your large food sources that migratory fish are going to kind of key on. Resident fish, however, while they will certainly eat a larger food source, and they will, because again, they're trying to gain all that nutrition, gain those calories for their upcoming spawn, or during their spawn. But they're also going to be much more hatch specific. They live in that river year round. They're used to the transition from, we've got caddis and PMDs and trichos, and then in the fall we'll get blue-winged olives and caddis and other hatches as well, depending on what river you're fishing. But those fish are going to be more in tune to what's happening inside the river and in the water during that time. So those are good bugs and good strategies as far as what the fish will be feeding. For me, fishing the Dream Stream, I do a lot of work out there. I feel like those migratory fish, especially when they come in early, love to eat leeches, worms, and scuds. They eat so many of those in the lake itself that those are excellent patterns to use. Crayfish, small sculpins, small trout, bait fish patterns. Those fish, again, they're very opportunistic, especially when they first enter the river before they have an opportunity to kind of get adjusted to the bug life happening in the river. After they're in the river for a while, they'll certainly eat those. It's one of those things of, okay, I remember that tasted good. That's a lot of calories for me. Again, they're also going to start to key in a little bit more on those bugs. So the main reason I included these two pictures is very simply, I want you to look at the size of the mouths. These fish are both lake run fish. This fish came out of Lake Michigan. This fish came out of Lake Ontario. Okay, these fish are built to eat big food. Okay, this fish ate a leech. This fish ate a dead drifted crayfish. These fish, like I said, they are built to eat big things. Okay, so we really want to make sure that we're giving these fish, especially migratory fish, food that they are used to seeing, that they are used to eating and are accustomed to seeing in the water. So next we're going to talk about fall dries, catching these large trophy brown trout on dry flies. As I mentioned before, fall is kind of a frame of mind as far as when it officially starts. We'll see these fish start to move early, August, September, other rivers October. These are prime times to fish hoppers. These fish, a lot of times will move up and due to heavier water kind of late summer before the flows start to drop as you get further into the fall. So, they are more prone to being opportunistic and coming up and eating a big meaty hopper. Some of my favorite hoppers to fish, especially, on the Dream or some of these other migratory fisheries, or even, at Deckers or anywhere else, the Williams Fork, really anywhere, would be the Charlie Boy hopper, the Fat Albert, Chubby Chernobyls, Amy's Ants, really just your famous hopper or your favorite hopper. Go with what you are comfortable with, what hopper you have confidence in. That's kind of one of my biggest things, especially when choosing flies. Whether it's a hopper or a nymph or a streamer, use what you have confidence in. For whatever reason, it seems to work best for everyone. What works for me doesn't always work for other people, and what works for other people doesn't always work for me. I feel a big part of that is just fishing it with confidence. So, use these big hoppers. You can certainly get these larger fish end of summer, early fall to come up and eat hoppers and eat dries. Good places to target these trophy fish with dries are going to be around those undercut banks and structure. Lay that fly right on the bank. If it's gonna float underneath the bank, let it go and listen for a sip or a splash. That fish could be under there waiting. Other times, if you're 6 feet off the bank, that fish will come out from underneath the bank and chew on it. Other good spots are going to be seams and around mid-channel structure. Okay, again, these fish, when they first enter the river, they're going to be super wary after leaving the larger, safety of a reservoir or a larger river. So they're going to be around rocks, around logs. So, float that hopper right in front of a big rock. If it looks like you can't see the bottom in front of a rock, that's a perfect spot to try a hopper. If you can't see the bottom on the seams coming off the sides of the rock, that's another great spot. Really just kind of focus when you're fishing dries, especially for these large fish, undercut banks and structure oriented. Okay, that's going to be where they don't feel quite as exposed when they want to come up and eat. They can come up, eat a hopper, and then go right back down. So if they come up, eat a natural hopper, they'll come up in front of that rock, eat it, go right back down to the safety of that deep water. Fall streamers. Okay, everybody, it seems like now, is a streamer junkie. There's nothing quite like getting a big fish to come up and eat a streamer. A lot of people will say that brown trout especially are much more aggressive. They certainly become aggressive in the fall and spring, but I've also, during the same time of fishing streamers for browns, will pick up cutthroats and rainbows. I think it's unfair that we just limit these streamer eats to browns. But the reasons that these streamers work so well is, there's an increased number of small trout. You have those small fish that have kind of made it through the year, are starting to venture out. If any of you have been to the Dream Stream recently, there's a whole bunch of little Timmies, a lot of little 5-6 inch fish out there. So that's an easy food source for those fish to go and get, and a big piece of protein. Again, pre-spawn food source. Okay, these fish want to intake as many calories as they can so that they can be effective during their spawning ritual. They're going to want to be well fit, I guess would be the best way to put it. They're going to have a little piece of sushi and be good to go. Whether that's fish or crayfish or whatever your favorite kind of streamer is. The other thing also is they're going to become very territorial, especially as they move closer to the spawn. These big male browns, they're going to kind of fend off, intruders from their territory. There's fish kind of moving around, and a little guy wants to kind of go up and get in the way of this big, large male. He's going to want to chase him off and, make sure that fish knows, okay, this is my spot. I'm waiting on my female. I'm waiting on my girlfriend to show up. So they become very territorial. When you're fishing fall streamers, again, deep runs and structure. Okay, those runs that you can't see to the bottom of, those fish very, very routinely will really eat just about anything that kind of comes in front of them. If you get it close enough to them, you'll kind of tick them off. Likewise, you can't see what's going on down there. You know, you're fishing a run that's deep. You can't see it all the way to the bottom. Um, you know, that fish has no problem moving side to side or moving to chase something. Nothing's going to see them from up above. And then again, structure. You know, undercut banks. One of my favorite ways to fish undercut banks in the fall is to cast downstream, let that fly kind of swing into the bank and strip it back up. You know, a lot of times those fish, again, out of aggression, showing where their territory is, and then again, because it's pre-spawn, those fish will a lot of times come out from under that undercut and attack that big streamer. You know, around rocks, you know, again, same thing as when you're fishing those dries. Swing a streamer right in front of rocks, right along the sides of rocks. You know, those fish, again, they'll come out from hiding. You know, just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. You know, it's one of those things, like I mentioned before, seeing that big tail underneath the rock. You know, maybe a big streamer is enough to get that fish to leave the comfort of that rock and come, you know, give you a tug. You know, good streamers to use. You know, whether you're imitating trout, small trout, you know, or other bait fish, little sculpin. You know, there's a lot of crayfish in a lot of the rivers around here. You know, those are huge food sources. So flies like sparkle minnows and autumn splendors, sculpzillas, sex dungeons, other large double jointed or articulated flies really give a lot of motion. Will kind of, you know, especially those articulated and double jointed flies, you know, it gives the impression that it's a wounded, you know, maybe a wounded trout or a wounded bait fish. That's a much easier meal than having to chase down a full on, you know, healthy little fish. So that's an easy way for them to get a lot of calories, is to eat that wounded fish. So definitely love trying streamers. You know, you can try them. I like fishing them early fall. You know, August, September, maybe the beginning of October, depending on where you are. But yeah, that's going to be kind of a big key to success on fishing streamers, is really targeting the pre-spawn trout. So this is a big brown, ate a ginger whistle, one of John Barr's meat whistles. You know, this was pretty easy fish actually to get to eat. I saw him chasing a couple other males around in a big deep run, and I just swung my streamer through there, let it sit on the bottom, gave it a few twitches, and he came over and smacked it. So you know, really kind of took advantage of seeing that bit of territoriality, pre-spawn mode, and yeah, ended up with a nice fish to hand. So, and then finally, fall nymphing. You know, these fish, while they'll move for streamers, they don't get big and to the size by being dumb. Okay, and what I mean by that is these fish are not going to exert a ton of energy if they don't have to get food. Most of these times, these fish are just going to allow their food sources to come to them. You know, you could kind of imagine a big person walking into a buffet and letting that buffet just be delivered to them at the table. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I would do that. If that would be an option, that would be something I'd be all over. So they're going to want to conserve energy. When you're nymphing, you're going to want to focus on some of the riffles and runs below spawning beds. Again, we don't want to target any of those fish on spawning beds, but use those spawning beds as a tool and kind of a key to understand where those fish may be while they're not on the beds. You know, those deep runs below the beds where they can feed without being exposed. You know, deep runs and pools. You know, again, all those areas where you can't see to the bottom, where those fish are feeling safe. That's where they're going to be most comfortable feeding. I guess that's kind of the best way to describe it. It's a comfort zone. They're going to feel most comfortable in that deep water. All right, that's where they're going to not feel the pressure and be able to eat without quite worrying as much. You know, okay, is this a real bug or not? Again, structure, you know, inside rocks, along seams, in front of rocks, really anywhere around structure that you can't see bottom. Those are kind of my go-tos as far as finding these fish when I'm nymphing. So a lot for point flies. If you're fishing a double or a triple nymph rig, I don't really like to use a triple nymph rig come fall when I'm targeting these trophy fish. I find you're going to foul hook a lot more fish if you have 3 bugs on than if you have 2. I know it eliminates a food source, but I'd rather be able to take a picture with a fair hooked fish than have to break off a foul hooked fish. So these flies that you're going to want to use as these bigger morsels are going to be your eggs, worms, leeches, crane fly larvae. Granted, the stones aren't really hatching, but they're still present in the water. If I'm a 10-pound fish, I'd much rather eat 2 or 3 big golden stones than 1,000 midges. I don't know, that's just the way I look at it, especially kind of as a point flyer and a tractor pattern. Again, also, especially when you're fishing a migratory fish, these larger food sources are going to be what they're a little bit more accustomed to, coming from that lake or from that larger river. As far as trailers go, you're going to want to match the hatch more. You have your point fly, you have your big food source. Depending on how long that fish has been in the river, they're going to become much more adjusted to the way things are going in that river. Okay, so I like to use for like smaller stones, copper johns, Baetis, 2-bit hookers, soft tackle PTs. Match your trailing fly to that most prevalent bug coming off. That's going to really kind of be a key to success. You're going to imitate both food sources those fish are used to eating. You're going to take care of that big, nutrient-rich food source, but you're also going to give them that bug that they're seeing a ton of. So that's kind of the best way, in my opinion, to target these big fall trophy trout when you're nymphing. So again, this is another big fish, but you can see the size of that nymph. This one ate a big stone. Not that stones were hatching or coming off. I think that day I saw a handful of small blue-winged olives and midges, but it ate a stone. So that's kind of on point with what we're talking about, imitating that larger food source. Give them something that's going to be meaty. And then finally, so our closing thoughts. So fall offers a chance to catch trophy trout. Why? Again, because those fish are going to start to lose their inhibitions. They're going to become more hungry, more on the quest for food as they get closer and closer to their spawn. And then after their spawn, when they're wanting to regain all those nutrients. You want to focus on those deeper water and structure areas, especially when fishing for fall brown trout. As I mentioned, those fish are going to be much more wary. They're going to want to be where they can't be easily seen. So rocks, undercut banks, those deep runs that you can't see to the bottom. The biggest thing I really hope people take away from this is finding fish below spawning beds and leaving fish on the bed themselves alone. We really do want to preserve the future of our sport, and the only way to do that is to leave those spawning fish alone. It's a great thing to witness, to understand. You'll see 2 fish actively spawning and be awesome. Those guys are making sure my kids and their kids are going to be able to fish this river. You rip those fish off of beds, stress them out to where they're going to leave and not want to spawn. That's a lot to kind of take away from whatever river you love fishing. Leaving those guys alone so that they can, again, let your kids and their kids fish. You can catch trophy trout in the fall on any discipline. Again, dries, hoppers, and early on you can even find those fish eating blue-winged olives or on the dream stream, or other spots, trichos. It's going to be fewer and further between, but they certainly will do that. Streamers are going to be very effective, especially in that early pre-spawn period. Making sure that they can get plenty of nutrition from a crayfish or a smaller trout or bait fish, as well as combining that territoriality and kind of showing what they're made of and making sure that they can continue their bloodline. And then nymphs. In general are going to be the most productive. Really any time of year. allowing a fish to move only a few inches or maybe a foot rather than chasing down or completely coming to the surface to feed is going to be your best bet at finding some of these trophy fish. And then finally, feed them the good stuff. All right, feed them those big leeches, feed them the worms, the eggs, those larger food sources that they are accustomed to seeing. It's one of those great strategies of, especially in where you're allowed, Colorado, we can use up to 3 flies. But if you use 2 or 3, give them a big bug starting off and then match the hatch below. So that would definitely be kind of what I would suggest. These are all strategies that have worked well for me over the years. There's certainly more than one way to do it, but I hope this helps and kind of adds to your toolbox a little bit as you pursue your fall trophy brown trout. So thank you so much once again. And yeah, looking forward to hearing any questions and thoughts. Thank you so much.